We're live. So much fun. And yes, I know my thumbnail is upside down. I have to send it again and redo it. But I got it up there really quickly because I'd already sent it to myself doing other things. So we will fix that before the night is over. But tonight we're talking about the video that I just posted. In fact, it just went up. And that is the video on more spark plug testing, because we know spark plug testing is awesome. And so far, we've seen actually very little in terms of power. But that in itself actually is also good news. I mean, any news is good news, really. But when you're doing testing, sometimes you find out as much about things that work, and that's really what you're looking for, quite honestly. I mean, if you go, test something and go, hey, I put on this nitrous kit, I picked up 12 horsepower. That's not really a very good nitrous kit, or an intake manifold or cylinder heads or whatever it is. It's funner to have like big power gains. That's why putting turbo stuff on and testing that, like testing. See, even for me, even today, I know what it's like to have an NA motor, especially one that's stock or near stock, and then you add boost to it. That still excites me. I know that I do a lot of testing with different cylinder heads and camshafts and intake manifolds and run different kinds of turbos and all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's still exciting to understand, because I know that a lot of people don't get this and they don't get to experience it. But it is so cool to be able to have a motor and then put a turbo on it, and then the kind of gains that you can get from a turbo are huge. And so if you add 50% of power, it doesn't matter what it was. It could be a 200 horsepower smog era V8. But if it's making 300 now, that's really, really good. That's a huge improvement. So boosted stuff is cool. So it is always cool when you're testing to find like big power stuff, like adding a turbo, like adding nitrous, like when I did all the cylinder head tests, or when you put a camshaft in an LS, whatever. It's great to hit home runs like that, and you can make lots and lots of power. This kind of testing takes every bit as much time. But with spark plugs and with oil, as we saw, the oil test actually under some power. When we changed the viscosity of the oil, it definitely changed power. But when you do these little things like these spark plug tests, a lot of times there just isn't any power. Not even just a little bit. Like there's none. There's literally no power. So when we test one spark plug and test another spark plug, like when we did the E3 stuff versus the laser platinums, and then the cheap, inexpensive Autolite or AutoZone Autolite copper plugs, and there's really no change. And if anything, the cheap plugs might have made one or two more, just like when we did the gap thing. But when we're testing all that stuff and it doesn't show anything, the thing that it does show us, we didn't get any power, but the thing that it does show us is that's not where you need to look. And that's actually why I do these kinds of tests. I have a pretty good idea. We've run lots and lots of tests at Westech, myself and Brule and the people that are there, mostly Brule, but even Eric and Ish and those guys, they've done a lot of stuff. And when you test these things and you've run them a bunch of times, and you go, even inadvertently, you change to a different kind of plug, different heat range, a different set, whatever, and you're like, it makes the same power and it does the same thing. So after a while, people have come into Westech to want to test their super wazoo triple tip plug or whatever it is, or double wazoo exhaust mufflers or whatever. They're going to add all kinds of power, and usually they don't. I mean, that's the thing. You test all this stuff and it doesn't work, but that's good information, so that it helps save a guy money to not buy this stuff. I've gotten lots of comments and questions and requests to try coils, because some video came out about somebody testing some coils and it made power. And I'm like, look, I can try it just like I tried this, and I want to do it to demonstrate what's going on. But the only time the coil a coil upgrade will make power is if the other coil is inadequate. And if you do that on an LS or on a Hemi or on a Coyote, on any sort of modern deal that has individual coil packs per cylinder, you're just not going to pick up power. Not because the other coil may well be better. Like you may have one coil that has 30,000 volts and the other one may have 40,000 volts. That's better. It's just like a bigger throttle body. You have a 102 millimeter throttle body. You have a 105 millimeter throttle body. Well, the 105 flows more than 102. Let's say that it does. It flows more. But if the 102 is already way more than you need for what you're trying to do, the 105 isn't going to do anything. And that's normally the case, like with coils. The factory coils, especially if you turn them up, and you would do that to any coil, they have enough to support like almost any kind of power level. So, what a guy wants and what he would actually get are different things. If somebody says, oh, yeah, it picked up 10 horsepower or whatever, well, it picked up 10 horsepower maybe because it cured a misfire, or maybe because they didn't have the ability to adjust the coil. Maybe they were trying to run 100,000 scap. I don't know what all the particulars are, but there was some sort of inadequacy there, and then they cured it. But there's no inadequacy in the factory coil, the factory wire, or the factory plug. There isn't any power there if all of those are working like they're supposed to and have the ability to do that. So, but what they think is, okay, they picked up power. It'd be like me putting a different spark plug in and changing the gap and picking up 100 horsepower on a turbo application, which is very, very easy because we would have had misfire before that because the gap was too big. And then we cured it, and now we picked up 100 horsepower. So you can say, yeah, spark plugs are worth 100 horsepower. Well, yes and no. Mostly no, they're not. Just bringing the plug gap down and curing the misfire cured the problem. It wasn't the Super Wazoo plug. It isn't the Super Wazoo coil. It isn't any of that. It may be that if we extend things out and get to enough cylinder pressure that our 30,000 volt coil is not enough, and now a 40,000 volt coil is, then you could do that. But what most average guys do, and guys that haven't been doing this a long time, don't understand everything that's going on in the automotive industry, what they think is if they just change the coil packs, because they're easy to change, they're external, people can see them, they look cool, it's all double throw down. If they change those, they think that they're going to get that 10 horsepower or whatever just by bolting them on and replacing something that's already good and already works. And that sort of thing isn't going to happen. And this is just like this test with our spark plugs. We tested heat ranges, and I also tested a gasketed plug versus a tapered seat plug on the LS. The reason that I did that test is because you can run either one of those. A lot of guys will, oh no, you got to run this. This is a tapered seat plug. It's got a tapered seat in there. Yeah, but the gasketed plug also seals in there. It works just fine. We know because every big bang motor that I've ever run has had gasketed plugs. In fact, 90% of the motors that I run, of the LS motors I run on the dyno at Westech, all have gasketed plugs. So I know that they work. And now I've demonstrated that they work because I've run a back-to-back test with a gasketed plug and tapered seat plug. And here are the things that we can discuss. And you guys can make comments about this in the comment section. On a tapered seat plug, here are the things to think about. And this is what I put in the video. On a tapered seat plug, the spark plug is going to stick in farther, not unlike a projected snout plug or projected nose plug. It's going to stick into the combustion chamber farther. So two things can happen. Two things are possible, two possible gains, or at least two possible changes. One is that it's displacing some of the open area in the chamber, effectively changing the compression. Because if you look at a gasketed plug, the gasketed plug basically ends right even flush with the surface of the combustion chamber wall. The gasketed plug protrudes into the combustion chamber. It takes up more space. Change in compression. You could actually measure that and see what the change is and see if it's enough to even make a difference. The other thing is, because we've pushed that spark plug in toward the center of the combustion chamber, have we changed the timing? Will it need a change in timing? Has it changed the burn rate and the flame travel? Now, we went through all that stuff with indexing the plugs. And so is that a possible change? Is that something that can also, so is the combination of more compression and then a better positioning of the initiation of the spark energy to, for flame travel and stuff, is that better? All of those are little tiny things that we can all discuss. But the cool thing is, this sort of test provides the absolute answer, at least in terms of power, because what people do is extrapolate a lot from, oh, well, there's this combustion chamber, change in combustion chamber size. So change in compression, and it's more favorable because it's in the center. It's a center electrode and a plug, and it expands out and does all these magic things. They use that and then extrapolate from that that's worth power. It's definitely worth power. Well, as it turns out, it's not. Neither one of those things. In fact, those two things combined were not worth any power. And so that's why I do these tests. So that not to stop people from arguing, because it's the internet and you're not going to do that. You're not going to stop the people from arguing. But at least it gives other people information that says, hey, look, I know that we can discuss that. And I know that you want that to be a thing. But the reality is, it's actually not. It's not a thing. It's not a thing that we need to be concerned about. Certainly not for any kind of street LS thing that we're talking about. If you want to start talking about that in terms of, class specific regulated combustion chamber size deals where a guy can stick an anti-spark plug in there and he wants to take some more displacement and do, all of that stuff can be discussed. But it showed zero power on the test that I just ran. So and the reason that I did it, like I said, it answers a lot of these questions and it tells people where to look and where not to look, but also for my own peace of mind, because I've run this so often and I just interchange them thinking, oh, look, it goes in there, it screws in, it tightens, it provides spark, and we've run it on a whole bunch of turbo things and never had any problems. But that doesn't answer the question, like, what does it really do? So I just answered the question, what does it really do? And now we know, because it, like a lot of the other tests with the E3 plugs and the 4-prong laser platinums on the copper plugs, in terms of spark plug, unless you have the gap too big and you're making a misfire, or you have a bad plug or a broken plug, spark plugs are not an area where you really need to be looking for big power gains, because they're just not there. There's just not something there. And I know the guys want me to run that other metal ruthenium or something. I'll go out on a limb and say there's not going to be any power there, not on this kind of motor. And I doubt that I'd ever see any power on any kind of spark plug change at this sort of like power level. Now the question is not that, because I think I've pretty well answered that. I ran like 10 sets of spark plugs through this thing and indexing and doing all the stuff. And not that that's absolute, but I think that the better question, or the thing where people would find more of a gain or a loss or a change, is in things like fuel mileage and emissions and stuff, and especially emissions. I think I would like to see an emissions test done on the indexing to see if there's something there, and to see if it would be interesting to see if there's a change in the detonation threshold with changes in indexing the plug, and then projected tips versus, and then the tapered seat versus the gasketed one, having the gasketed one out of the chamber. Does that thing make the thing less susceptible to detonation? I mean, there's lots of really cool questions here, and ones that I cannot answer on the dyno. We can answer power ones pretty well, but the other things would be, much more difficult. Much more. Let's see. So the question is, do I need to, whole question. Do I need to run any more spark plug? Okay. So the poll for tonight will be, do I need to run any more spark plug tests on the LS? We will ask our community. And we're asking. I'm going to scroll back. I'm going to go to top chat and then live chat. Everybody's in the house. You were watching till I came on. Who did you expect? Somebody special? I don't know whether you run the 3924 or 3923s in my mild turbo setup. Idle sounds stronger with the hotter plugs. I don't know how idle sounding stronger with plugs. I don't know how you would be able to detect that, honestly. And that's not that's not quite analytical enough for me. It's not quite definitive enough. I'd have to see an RPM change or a change in the air fuel or something else that would determine that it liked or disliked something. And, I'd have to see the data on that. Figuring out stuff that don't work and make for some fun combinations. the big leap in ignition is pre-chamber on the direct ignition motors. Okay. The pre-chamber stuff was very cool back in the CVCC days. I run a colder plug on my LT1 with 12.4 to 1, which you probably should. 1 liter Mafia is in the house. Richard, on our LS turbo motor, should we run a windage tray? Yes. You should, on every LS should have a windage tray. That's right. I am. Autolite makes platinum and iridium plugs also. Yeah, they do. People just think of them as copper. I specifically ordered the cheap, inexpensive copper stuff for that test. Not that we have lots of iridiums that we've run on stuff. So many people overbuild weird parts, especially here in the Pontiac world. One of the things I'm looking forward to on the Pontiac is running LS lifters in it, and hopefully some kind of roller cam, and it would be good. Richard, on the LS turbos, there's not a best place to run the oil. There's lots of places you can do it. Depending on what size your turbo is on, usually kind of dictates where it's going to go. A lot of guys run it into the front cover. Some guys run it into the side. It's best to have it go in the direction of rotation, not toward the direction of rotation. And have it be above the oil line. Those are kind of the big things. If your engine has only one coil, then yes, go with an MSD. If it's a multiple coil, leave it stock. Yeah, you can increase ignition energy even to multiple coil deals, but an MSD is beneficial not just for, a lot of guys think it's an ignition amplifier, which it is, but the multi-strike deal can be really good for, can be beneficial for mileage and stuff. Let's see here. I would actually like to see that test. I'd like to see an MSD added to a combination and see if it changes the emissions output. Do I need to run any more spark plug tests? 76% are saying no. The plug test should be done on an older small block or big block carb with old points and an HEI. Yeah, points, you might see some stuff. Do you do something special to install gasket plugs? No, you just screw them in. The factory heads already have a shoulder on them. LS has too powerful of an ignition system. It does, and that's the point with the coil test. Is that's why I think a coil test is destined to fail on an LS, because it's going to be hard to make something that's better than that already. So you're saying what I need to do is reduce the ignition strength so that we could see if a plug will help cure that? Two live feeds in the same day, Recal. You're on a roll. I'm guessing you have close to the best heat range. Test it for drivability. I'm curious if the plug change would have more bearing on battery loading, causing horsepower gain or loss. Well, there wasn't a horsepower gain or loss from a spark plug change, and I don't know how it's going to change the loading on the battery. The only reason to use precious metal plugs is they last longer. Yeah, we went over that in the video. That's really why people are doing it, because a copper usually, an older style copper plug will usually erode much faster, even though it is very conductive. It works very well. But as we talked about, let's say that the copper was more conductive than the precious metal stuff, and we get more spark energy. You only need enough to do what you're trying to do. More of it, just like our bigger throttle body, won't do anything. So if you are doing what you need to do, then it will work. And having more conductivity, because people argue about that too. They argue about little things. Well, we didn't see any change in power from changing these plugs, like the E3 and the laser platinum, even though there were a big change in the design of the plug and I guess theoretically the ignition output. But they argue that, well, one of those metals is more conductive than the other. I'm like, that's great. That's fantastic. You can talk about that. But the question for the test was, did they change power at all? Did that other aspect that you're talking about change power? Like, we know a bigger throttle body flows more, but when we put it on, did it add any power? If it didn't add any power, it's not because the bigger throttle body didn't flow more or because the spark plug doesn't have more like conductivity, but the combination didn't need it to make more power. And so that's really the question. Blaine, let's see. Run the 2.2 ignition system. We're going to do that, but I'm thinking I'm going to have to add an ignition amplifier. I couldn't find a set of split fires. Do they still make those? I thought indexing plug was to evolve piston dome contact. It's to eliminate. Yeah, that's normally why we index plugs, and that's why I have in the past, so that it doesn't hit. But a lot of people do it for performance. So I can now go to live chat. Let's see. I didn't try split fires. Is there any benefit to using an external oil cooler for the engine as far as thermals are concerned? Would it benefit? It's not going to benefit horsepower in any way. It's just going to keep what you're trying to do is just keep the oil in an effective operating range. You don't want it to get too hot because then it'll break down. And that's usually done in, sustained usage, lots of throttle applications like road racing and stuff. I could feel the difference between an MSD and the forward box on my 79 Mustang. Don't buy spark plugs on Amazon. Got some counterfeit NGKs. I've heard that that's happening. I haven't ever run across that, but somebody told me that that's actually a real thing. Put swirl port heads on a carb application. Had to go back to the hotter plug used on the factory 79 carb heads. Why would you have to change the spark plug on a different kind of head? I have a different question. Is an LT4 hot cam too big for a TPI with ZZ4 and AFR 195s? You have a TPI with a ZZ4 cam and you want to put an LT4 hot cam in it? Is that what your question is? You have a TPI with Siamese runners. So tell me what you want to put an LT4 hot cam in. What cam is in it now? LT4 specs, since I don't know those. 210, 228. That's not very big, if that's the cam. Have you ever considered testing resistorless spark plugs? I haven't done a resistor, non-resistor test. Ben, it's the middle of the day in Australia. Welcome. How can you tell the difference between RPM-related ignition problems versus RPM-related valve train problems? Well, you would start your test sequence. You would just start testing things. First thing I would do is bring the plug gap down to see if it's an ignition problem. And if then the way that we would determine that on the dyno, if it's a valve train problem like valve float, we have an air hat on it, especially on a carbureted application. We have an air hat on it, and if we see the airflow go flat or go down, then we know that it's got valve float. And we can hear valve float on the engine dyno too. If your plug's too hot, your engine will knock. If it's too cold, it won't self-clean. You might get away with a bit more timing. Maybe on extreme ends, that could be the case. I don't know if the extended noses are beneficial. We didn't see anything from the tapered seat plug was actually a slightly longer nose than the gasketed plug that we used, and I didn't really see anything. Oh, it's a ZZ4 crate motor. No, that cam is not very big, so that will be fine. Especially if you've Siamese the runners in it. Actually, it's a cam that you could use on a modified tune port motor anyway. Sinister, I don't know the answer to this because I didn't know that this was a thing. How do you explain the RPM drop an aircraft engine has when you turn off one of the magnetos? You usually get a 50 RPM drop. Does it need both of those to fire? I mean, is it misfiring? Is it losing spark energy? Extended noses would increase compression a bit. We talked about that. In the test that I did with a tapered seat plug versus the gasketed plug, we increased the compression with a tapered seat plug because it went into the chamber much farther. If you look at the video, you'll see how much farther it is, and yet there was no change in power. I'd like to see a test on the twin spark plug Hemi. Is there any difference without the second plug? I would like to see that test too. I can't remember I don't think I ever ran that test on the engine dyno on the Gen 3 Hemi. So Blaine, do you want to put the ZZ4 cam in or the hot cam in? The ZZ4 cam is probably bigger, isn't it? ZZ4 small box Chevy cam specs. That's only a 208 221. Right? Is that the right one? I think both of those are small cams. You don't see a difference between plugs or indexing at 12-to-1 air fuel. Good for us. We didn't run it at 12-to-1. Any difference might show up near stoic. But you wouldn't be running stoic at wide open throttle. Why do people say British plugs are great? I never heard that. I vote we want to see a spark plug wire test on an old school distributor. So what kind of wires do you want to see? What is the screwdriver in front of the left-hand cylinder head for? It's not a screwdriver. It's actually that's a cooling system mod. It's just a plug for the crossover tube. I put it in there because we needed something to plug a line that was coming off for the crossover tube on the LS, and then it's never been changed. It's never been fixed because it worked. Would there be more of a benefit in indexing plugs on non-crossflow heads, such as an older inline 6? I don't know. I don't honestly know how indexing is going to help that. Maybe if we didn't have enough ignition voltage, that may start showing itself more, but I don't know. I'd have to test it to see. Did you happen to check out Eric's video about spring pressure on heads that have been sitting with the valves open? No. How long did he let the head sit like that? Which is better, 2.5 or 3-inch piping for turbo hot side and cold side? Are you talking about the crossover going to the turbo and the discharge side? We normally use 3-inch for the discharge side, or 3.5, depending on which intercooler we're using. And 2.5 is fine for the hot side. And then after the turbo, you want it to be gigantic. A couple things on the airplane mags. Timing on each mag is slightly different. Those magnets are weak. Okay. So when they don't have enough ignition energy and then they have enough ignition energy, then we have a gain. I just read about how much amps per horsepower the alternator takes. I forget the number, but it's pretty small. Yeah. I could see more spark energy be beneficial for supercharged engines for spark blowout. Yeah, and that's why we reduce the gap so that it will make that jump. Windows a CDI box. An ignition amplifier is a good idea. More so, not on these multi-coil deals, but more so on a single coil deal, and on a boosted application, it's probably a good idea. And the magneto, somebody's saying that they're timed slightly differently too. So they have lead and trailing plugs. I've heard valve spring degradation is from number of cycles rather than sitting loaded for extended periods of time. They do have a cycle life, and you will get the spring will get weaker during its cycle life. MSD 8mm low resistance wires, tailored 10mm versus stock high resistance wires. Okay. Yeah, Larry, for 2 years, I wouldn't worry about that. I don't think you're going to see anything. You could test it, and let us know if you see anything. The problem is you probably don't have a before test on those two springs. Do you prefer NGK TR6 gap to 35 for a cam to 5.3? The gap can be almost anywhere, as we've shown in the gap test. And those will work. That NGK TR6 will work fine for a 5.3. Racer D, I did get the pictures of the reverse cooling system. I'm actually still trying to figure it out. I'm still trying to figure out the direction of the flow and where everything is going. But I like the idea, and I'm thinking about doing it on the 2.2 when we really turn it up. I've heard a short recessed plug is a bad scenario. You mean recessed into the spark plug hole? You don't want threads showing, because those are potential hot spots. Is it necessary to have the vacuum line hooked up to your fuel pressure regulator on a naturally aspirated engine? Yes, if your factory engine was tuned like that, because it will have under vacuum, under cruise and stuff, it will take fuel pressure away. So it will take fuel flow away to the injectors. and your tune was done with that in mind. Any benefit running a 4.8 rotating assembly and a 6-liter block turbo? Of course, you're going to make less power if that's what you're trying to do. You should just turbo the 6-liter. Best blow off valve and wastegate brands for the turbo. We use Turbo Smart stuff, but there's a lot of good stuff. Excluding top fuel, just having 2 plugs per cylinder add power in the Hemis. I don't think that they did it for power in the Hemis. I think that they did it for emissions because that's a terrible chamber design, and they're trying to get all of the emissions out of the chamber under idle and cruise. And I don't think that they were able to do it with a single plug. Oh, you went to the Ontario LKQ on Monday? Lots of 5.3s there. Was hoping to have a Richard sighting, but no dice. I haven't been there in a while. I won't be back down there for a little bit. I have Ben has sent me out the flywheel and fuel rail that I needed for the 2.2. So hopefully when I go down there, I'll be testing that. I talked to the guys at Texas Speed, and he said that they're going to send out hopefully a Chupacabra. So I'll have, I think, 4 cams to test. Steve from Cam Motion sending one, Brian over at Brian Tooley Racing, and then Brian over at Summit, and then Joe over at Texas Speed. So it'll be very cool to have all those, and so people will be able to see the results and get in and argue all that they want. What was found on the Hemi, the second plug was in the correct position, so the first plug was not run anymore. Did they go to single plug stuff? I don't remember. There was a 2.2 charger on the Ontario LKQ. Wow, I hardly ever see 2.2s there. What I would like from that is the factory airbox. The Yamaha IT 490 that had yellow orange spark and it was thin to the boot. Although it ran out okay despite this. Mentioned the primary coil. You lost that. The new one produced a fuzzy blue spark. so we're gauging it by color. That's pretty cool. The chili bomb testing, the 2.2 Dodge will be a perfect thing for the chili bomb, but also on the a single turbo. The single turbo LS would be good. David Vizard will argue the spark plug versus horsepower issue. Well, he wouldn't be able to argue the results of this test because they didn't show anything. Vizard does side gap plugs. Side gap's not going to do anything on this LS. The engine has been tuned without it hooked up, so if any lean spots are found, they were tuned out. That was a weird power loss that Dave experienced. He might have had a plug going out or something. I don't know. The fuel pressure regulator vacuum references to keep the pressure across the injector constant. He was talking about in a naturally aspirated combination. You can tune around not having the vacuum line. I like having it there because it does the exact tuning exactly when you need it. And also I like having it there on boosted applications for 2 reasons. One is it does it in both directions. One is it keeps fuel pressure, the delta pressure constant with boost, which you want. And especially if you're getting limited in injector size. But also on the other side of that, if you have a really big injector, it taking fuel pressure away at idle, and if you've got 10 or 15 or 20 inches of vacuum, it takes fuel pressure away and takes fuel flow away. So it makes it a little easier to tune the bigger injectors. Solid core versus radio suppression wires. Yeah, we were talking about that resistor versus non-resistor stuff. But a wire test. Yeah. Again, the thing is, people are talking about something being more conductive. That's not the question. One of them is more conductive than the other. The question is, if the one that's less conductive is already more than conductive enough to do what it needs to do, having more conductivity isn't going to do anything. It's only going to do something when one of them was inadequate. Are you going to test the difference between projected tip and non-projected tip? No, but the test that I did on the gasketed versus the tapered seat plug already did that, and it didn't really show anything. High performance coils might be a really expensive way to keep from having to close the gap from boost. I don't think there's any coil that's going to make it so that you can run 40 thousandths plug gap on a motor that's running 30 pounds of boost. I just don't think that's going to happen. Richard, is there a chance of boosting a 302 until the block splits? I think that there probably would be. Test the fast LSXRT intake from eBay. It's like $80. I don't. Somebody send me a link to something like that. I've never seen that. I've never seen anything that looks anything like an LSXRT from eBay or anywhere else. The only ones I've seen are the Dorman ones, and those are not. Those are just Dorman truck manifolds. Not to change the subject, but I just watched the Black Phone movie and it blew me away. I haven't seen that. I remember seeing the previews for it. I think we're going to see Avatar tomorrow. I would like to see a super high voltage setup with an individual coil per spark plug, like the 700 horsepower naturally aspirated engine masters competition carbureted Hemi. I mean, isn't an LS already a super high voltage setup with individual coil per spark plug? Mad Miata, you can take a look. I tested E3 spark plugs. I have that video up. We tested E3s against the laser platinums against just regular cheap copper core plugs. Is there a boost level or application where you'd run a non-projected tip in place of what was originally came with a projected tip plug? If an LS came with a projected tip plug, I replace it immediately because we just put a colder plug in it. We put an IQ 31 or a 29 or something in there, and it's not projected tip. And we do it if I'm going to run boost. I mean, we have run boost on stock plugs before at low boost, only mostly because I just forgot to change them when I was doing a bunch of stuff, and we just ran it anyway. So it will work, and we have the benefit, at least on the dyno, of the water's cold, the air is cold, the intercooler water's cold, the timing is right, the air feels right. All that's perfect. So we're not worried about the safety margin. We have lots of safety margin, and it always has good gas in it and stuff. So there's less of a chance of something happening, but we will always put a non-projected tip plug in there. I was on your stream earlier, bought 210 roller heads from Speedmaster, got an 88 millimeter precision. I like where this is going with a T6 flange. Figure Boost doesn't care about heads. Should I have precautions to check heads? I would make sure that all of the things are right on the head. You need to test E3s in a lawnmower, so that's going to be hard to run on the dyno. Have you seen Boost on a 4-banger flathead? I can't remember what the Flatfire had a flathead in it, but that might have been a V8 though. Carb test, blow through stuff on a Holly and a Q-Jet. I'd never done a blow through Q-Jet, modified versus non-modified. Interview Kevin from CSU. Kevin's a good guy. He's actually been over to help when we've been doing some testing. Unfortunately, we weren't able to cure what the issue was, but he did come over and try to help us figure stuff out that we couldn't figure out. And then none of us could figure it out, unfortunately. But because it wasn't a problem with the carburetor is what we figured out. I haven't run a blow through quadrijet ever, and I've never tried to make one like that. When are you going to do a small block Chevy Vortec test to see how much it can handle, how much the bottom end can handle? I should. I'd like to do an L31. Have you tried 80,000 volt coils on LS with bigger plug gaps? I don't think I have. I don't even know what the factory ones are. Does anybody know what the factory coils are? Fascist 3D movies screw with my eyes. Half the screen is always blurry. I'm not a big fan of 3D movies either. I don't like wearing glasses when I go in there, but unless you're going to see Piranha. A long time no see. Good low buck off the wastegate for GT45 on. Let's see. Good low buck blow off valve and wastegate. I don't normally use low buck wastegates. Blow off valve I probably would, but I spend money on wastegates for turbo stuff. Yeah, Michael, you're on the right track with your BR6s. If you had bad experiences with Speedmaster, some of their heads and stuff, you just need to check and see. Is there someone you could point me to off the bat, out of the box? I don't know where you are or who you're dealing with or anything. We've had trouble with their valve springs if it's an assembled head, with valves and seats. So it just, a lot of times guys will buy bare heads and then they will do all the things to them and make them better. Like to see a small book Chevy Vortec cam test, stock LT1, an LT1 cam, ZZ4 hot cam. The LT1 and ZZ4 cam won't work in a Vortec, will it? Isn't the snout different on those cams? Isn't the snout different for the drive on the ignition on the LT stuff? What's the difference between an LM7 and an L33? The LM7 is iron. The L33 is aluminum. The LM7 has a dish piston and a 706 head or an 862 head. The L33 has a flat top piston and a 799 head. Both have the same intake manifold, and they have also different camshafts. Let's see how our poll is doing. 71% saying no, I don't need to do any spark plug test. I don't know. I mean, other than the resistor thing, I guess we could try that. But Richard, have you done internal versus external wastegate tests? The only time that comes into play is when we've had trouble with internal gates just not flowing enough. So on small turbos, they work fairly well, but on bigger turbos, an internal gate is not a good idea. The little flapper valve just doesn't have enough flow rate to stop the thing from having like a rising boost curve. It just doesn't have control that a bigger wastegate will have, a bigger external gate. That's usually the big difference for me. They will work. People use to swap them into third gens. You have to trim the dowel. Okay. How would you dyno a radial rotary motor? I don't know. The Speedmaster heads, the springs, they may check out okay if you take them. We take them off and put them on a spring tester. You would need to check them for spring rate for whatever cam you're using, and also coil bind for whatever cam you're using. But the problem that we had is right after they would run for 5 or 10 minutes, the springs would go away, and so they would lose the rate. And so you'd go into valve float and stuff because the springs just went away. They just weren't good springs. What do you think about putting an external gate on the turbine housing? I've seen guys do that. Matt's done that over at Sloppy. It's not going to have better control than having it somewhere else. Normally, that's just done. Like he did it as a gee whiz thing because people told him that you couldn't weld it on there. But it's normally done for fitment so that you could position it in a spot that you can't put it to the side or in front of or whatever. Testing resistor plugs effects on electronics should be great. We don't, it's not like we're running stereos and stuff on this. So I don't know if that's going to be a good test unless it has some sort of RF that throws off because the ECU is in the dyno cell. Chad, what's been the craziest moment on the dyno? We've had some explosions. Like I had a damper on a 351 that a guy stick welded very poorly and it came apart on the dyno and went through the ceiling and stuff. Brule had one, had the lid blow off of a blower and that lodged itself into the ceiling. I've had dampeners come off. I had an LS damper break, the 3-prong one, the factory truck one, broke all of the legs off it and the thing was just spinning on the floor. When we've done the some of the big bang stuff, although the big bang stuff's not really been very exciting, some of the stuff would catch fire. When I was doing the Wheel of Death, we loaded a motor at wide open throttle like at 4,500 or something, and I went out and took the drain plug out of the oil pan and let all the oil drain out. And then when it kicked a rod out, that caught on fire a little bit. But it's there's some fun stuff. Are the BTR truck Norris springs that come with the cam? So do they have a cam kit good for longevity and reliability? Yeah, the Brian Tooley Racing springs are really good. Good luck with the Speedmaster heads. We've used them and they work, but we always check them out though. I've never had a flywheel or flex plate come apart. One of Mahovitz's motors came apart and it sawed the motor in half. Basically, the rod it was an aluminum motor and the rod kind of cut itself pretty big. Yeah, Frank, the resistor plugs could cause all kinds of interference. Stiffer springs are harder on the cam and lifters. Yeah, they certainly can be. You can overspring stuff, and that's not good. It's not good on an LS. It's not good on a flat tappet. It's not good on anything. And also, stiffer springs actually cost power. I have a video up on that. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll out at 70% saying no, I do not need to run any more spark plug tests. 30% still saying yes. And they're probably the ones that are talking about resistor plugs and such. Did you see the video of the Master Shredder 3,000 horsepower diesel truck? Whole top of the motor blew off. Yeah, I saw that. The diesel stuff is amazing when they get runaways on them. In high school auto shop, someone flooded an engine, then pulled the distributor with the ignition turned on and blew the valve covers off. Yeah, that's exciting. We did a hydrolock on it on one of them, and we dropped BBs down them. And then when I dropped the catastrophic thing was when I dropped a stainless steel 5/16 nut down there, and it destroyed the motor. A J series Big Bang would be cool. A J series testing would be cool. I think I'd like to do some J series stuff, and I plan to. Because that's a good power plant, and my buddy Jimmy has one for his NSX, and he's that thing's making good power. I mean, I think that thing is 1,000 horsepower motor with rods and pistons in it. It's got, and then you can, there are guys that do CNC port work on the heads and stuff. Yeah, I'm not really interested in doing a J series Big Bang. I'm more interested in doing testing with them. I don't know what the thing. I'm sure it'd be a piston or a rod that would break. A J series Miata, that would be fun. Even a K series Miata would be fun. I have a 3.7, not much support though. You think the Corolla GR engine has any relation to the Chevy Suzuki 3-cylinder one? You mean the new one? I don't know anything about it. I know that did they put that in the Yaris also? Did they put that 3-cylinder in the Yaris? A J series in anything is good. I mean, he picked the J series for his NSX because he didn't want to have to build another C series, which is pretty expensive. Is a stroker kit for a 6-liter LS worth an effort for a street trip build for more power? It will definitely, if it's an NA motor, it will definitely make a lot more average power if you make a 408 out of a 6-liter. It'll just be better everywhere. So if that's what you want, it will definitely do that. On a boosted one, I wouldn't do it. I would just make a 6-liter with a turbo on it. 2012 Yaris sedan had a 4-cylinder. Yeah, but in some sort of, I thought in some sort of racy Yaris, whatever, had I thought that they had like a 300 horsepower 3-cylinder version of that. The GM 3.6 liter double overhead cam could also be. People have asked me to do that one as well. I think that was probably the predecessor to the LV3 and LV1. Is that the high feature motor? The Yaris had a 1.51 NZ. I had that in my Yaris because I had one in 08, I think. The Yaris GR maybe is the one I was thinking of. Yeah, Frank, what's up? Those motors are not very reliable. I like the Ameribera Straight 6. Surprised the 2.2 and 2.4 Ecotechs didn't from the 2000s didn't take off and swap popularity. We have a guy that comes into West Tech that has one in a Fiero, and it's pretty cool. All-wheel drive Astrovan. That would be cool to like have a little Astrovan with an all-wheel drive and an LS in it, and just spin all four tires. All four tires. That would be awesome. Yeah, my Yaris was not. I didn't think it was. I mean, I like the car. It looked good as a Yaris S, so it had all the fancy body cladding on it, but it was way underpowered and not nearly for as underpowered as it was. It didn't get the mileage that I think it should have for being that underpowered. It was much funner when we put a turbo on it. I want a good 4-cylinder with a turbo and a 64 Comet. Which one? If I was going to pick a 4-cylinder to turbocharge, I would pick a K series Honda. Robert, what makes you decide the air fuel ratio? Well, the engine actually decides that. We know what it wants. And if you're at 12.6 and you're going to add boost, I'm hoping you're not running 12.6 under boost. If you're running boost, it should be in the 11s. It should be in the low to mid 11s. Hope you all had a good holiday. Sleeper, I understand indexing plugs helps with ignition, but does it really make a noticeable? It doesn't. It didn't do anything to power. I like those 64 comments. I also like the little falcons, and is it a little ranchero also that they have that looks like that? Hmm. Yeah, Shadow Ops. I thought somebody had told me that the Euro. I've never even looked it up or anything, but I thought somebody told me that it had a little, because people were, when I was talking about the Sprint turbo, people were sending me information on that Yaris. Indexing was not worth any power. Please don't tell people that it was worth 1 horsepower, because then they're going to say it's worth power. It's not worth any power. It was worth 0 power. On the street, you can add power or take away weight. Both of those do the same thing. The nice thing about removing weight is it not only helps acceleration, which power does, but helps everything else too. It helps with braking, it helps with handling, it helps fuel mileage. So if you can take weight off, that's good too. Yeah, Robert, you definitely need to take timing away if you're running boost. The USTM available GR Corolla has a 1.63 cylinder. Is it a turbo 1.6? And it's a 1.63 cylinder? That's a really big 3-cylinder. If you're looking for 1 horsepower on these dyno plots, you shouldn't be. If you want to keep a salt flat car on the heavy side, most guys do, especially rear wheel drive stuff. Front wheel drive stuff is not nearly as concerning because we have the weight over the drive wheels. And the back end doesn't want to pass the front end, so it's not nearly as much of a problem. But most guys don't care about weight. We put big cages and all that stuff in them because it's more an aerodynamic drag deal. It's all drag. A working electric turbo. The Formula One guys have that stuff, right? 2.7. Yeah, that's the small version of the Ameribearer, right? That's that 4-cylinder version of that 4.2 liter 6-cylinder. I would be surprised if nobody has ever run a school bus at Bonneville. They've run big rigs and all, and go karts and sidecars and canoes and all sorts of weird stuff. Does 3-inch exhaust better than a 2.5-inch exhaust on a 5.3 LS? No cats and long tubes, trying to maximize horsepower. I don't think you're going to see anything there on a 5.3. Is it just a cammed 5.3? Let's see. Uh, Today we'll be discussing the 2.7 liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine offered by General Motors in the new Silverado, Colorado GMC Canyon, also in the Cadillac CT4. And then I think that they upgraded it, made it a different displacement, right? Didn't they make it bigger later on? That's what I was thinking. Yeah, if you're sub 3,000 pounds on your Mustang, especially an 07 Mustang, that's really good. I haven't done anything with the 2.7 4-cylinder version, only the 6-cylinder. One more question. I've never run an LV1 here. The guys at Brian Tooley Rant did run an LV1 out there. I don't remember if there's an LV1 or an LV3, but it was that engine family. And they did some cam testing and stuff on it. They had problems with the oil pressure on that thing. What guitar solo? It's the intro music for the videos. This is images of GM 2.7 liter Atlas 4-cylinder. Let's see. This is from Haggerty, so those guys are pretty good. Or is that a... No, that's a turbo version. That's not the same one. Right? Because that was never a turbo version. Let's see here. General Motors Atlas motor. Vortec 4200, 3500, 3700, 2800, 2900. Oh, the 28 and the 29. Yep, 28 and 29. What the heck one was I looking at? Sweet. See, you were right. Oh, that new 2.7 is a new one. See how much I know. The Wolf of Wall Street. No, it's not that one. That was a funny movie, though. For turbos and superchargers, visor leaves the intake valve alone, enlarges the exhaust a lot. I don't know about making absolute statements like that, but that's not what I would do. I would try to make more NA power, and that means doing a, upgrading the head, upgrading both of them. Like if you were doing a 5-liter Ford, you wouldn't just put more exhaust valve in a stock head. I would change the stock head. I would put an AFR head on there. And on that note, it's time to go. I will see you guys all tomorrow. Make sure to take a look at the video that I put up. It's on all the testing on spark plug tests. We talked about a lot of that tonight. It's on the heat range, so very, very hot versus very, very cold plugs, and the extended tip kind of. It's a tapered seat plug versus a gasket one, puts the spark plug in there farther. And you guys can check it out. And I will see you guys all tomorrow. Now I want to hum the tune from Wolf of Wall Street.